Oh, this,
Okay. Yeah, wait, very good cover. Wheat, good.
good.
Yeah, good. Okay. So I have to translate it.
Why?
Yeah, that's a good question. But sometimes we need it. I see that my head is not visible. Okay. I am. Okay. Okay. I am here. Okay.
You
Okay.
want the chair?
No, 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 no. Not at all. Okej, so bardzo Państwa serdecznie witam. Jesteśmy w studio muzyki elektroakustycznej. Drugi wykład w ramach sesji Audio Art. So Audio Art Conference still continue. We have the meetings at the Studio for Electroacoustic Music at the Academy of Music in Kraków. My mask is going down, so which is just typical, you know, for many politicians talking, but I'm not politician, so I can correct easily. Okay, and we have an excellent teacher, artist, performer, Hans W. Koch. W. Koch. You have to remember that his first name, the second, and the third name should be written with small letter. Please don't write by
Capitals.
capital letter. Capital is forbidden.
No capitalism.
All capitals are forbidden.
No capitalism.
So I think that's enough for the beginning. The title of the lecture is Sounds and Processes, both in plural. Hans Bukow from Cologne. Thank you very much for coming. Oh, I should say on the end. Okay, sorry.
Oh, there's an applause from across the hallway. Yeah, thank you for coming on a Saturday evening. I think I take my mask off since
Yeah,
you are all so far away, and I feel so lonely here. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Marek. Sounds as processes or sound and processes is something I wanted to talk about with regards to things I've done and why choosing the title is. Maybe I start with this. No, just not here because I need that space. I start with a small sound. And of course I make it wrong. This will keep me busy for half an hour. I use this as kind of a metaphor for what is a sound and what is a process. You heard a sound, obviously, and you saw something spinning, and it also ended. So what sounds generally are terminating. Usually we think about electronic sounds going on as long as we have electricity, but before there was electric sound, there was and still is acoustic sound generated by whatever object. And behind every sound which occurs is some energy which has to dissipate, to be transformed into vibrations in the air so it can reach our ear, or sometimes it reaches our ear and we don't even detect this, like the bat sounds or so. So each sound is already embedded in some energy dissipation and some time frame which is needed for that. Or I can put it more poetically, not me, but the French philosopher Émile Cioran, who wrote about music and sounds as a system of farewells or a physics of tears, saying farewell. That's a very poetic way of putting it, but it relates very much to what I'm interested in when working with sounds. It's not so much about conveying a meaning, but to find a process which drives the sound and then finds an ending by itself, not by a narrative or by trying to convey an emotion, but developing or creating a process which gives the sound space to evolve. Sounds very abstract already. What I probably make an example of what I'm trying to convey. And the first example I want to play, it's just music. It's a piece for electronic guitar and a delay. And it's called Dazwischer because Dazwischer is like the comparative of in between. Is there something more in between? Or so it's for me, the idea is it's in between an installation and a performance. Oh, coffee is being served.
Yeah, coffee coming.
Maybe,
From the streamed area.
but not from the portable maker. That's very kind, thank you. It could be also like a schnapps.
Wow. Ale cukier jest. Jest to korzystam.
Sorry for the interruption.
No, thank you.
Ciekawe jest, co było w tym człowieczku wcześniej.
It actually reminds me that if you have questions or remarks to what I'm saying, please just interrupt me because I can talk for 2 hours or so, but
We can always...
exactly. Cheers.
So, did you put... Okay, you didn't play it yet.
Yes, it's over.
Well, you know, my ears are getting worse and worse, but I use it for my music. So I produce the music which is not audible for me. It's all audible for the audience. So I'm sleeping involved.
High frequency sounding.
Yes. Oh, that was one of them, I think.
So it's the piece kind of dies on natural causes because there's nothing to vibrate anymore. Did you understand what the basic setup was, this delay line, and the change of the role of the musician is to disturb a system which otherwise would just perfectly sound in as long as there is electricity around.
So it's not just the traditional way of playing guitar. This is just the
Actually, I could play it. I did it. It wasn't me. The performance here was done by Tom Powell's, but it's a guitar piece which I could play. I cannot play the guitar.
So what is the setup of the program that generates actually most of the score?
It's a delay line in Maximus P and an envelope follower. And the delay line changes when the envelope of the incoming signal changes. So when there's a stable signal, there will be no change in the delay line. That's when it settles. Like at the beginning, you have a typical feedback sound. But when you loosen one of the string, then you're changing the level of the signal, which influences the delay line. So it jumps around. That's digital delay lines. They change pitch when you change the length.
So do I understand correctly that the program kind of reacts to what the artist is doing?
Yes,
Okay.
and the artist reacts to what the program is doing. Because after a while, it settles again to a stable condition, and then the artist has to be there and destabilize it.
Could you tell us more about the concept as itself, the concept that's vision, because it sounds pretty interesting, and I'm just wondering how, what was your basic idea on appearing of that concept in that piece? Because the first title was non-existent, as I saw on the legend of your score, and I was just wondering, because non-existent is quite different concept of tuition, because tuition is some like tuition realm, for example, like Marc-André explains. Yeah.
Maybe you got it wrong. It was a non-existing comparative of in between.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So it's a state which is even more neither installation nor concert piece.
Yeah. Okay. I got it.
It's kind of the idea is to put a performer on stage, but also to withdraw him as a performer. These days, one could run the piece with a robot, I guess, as an installative piece, but I'm not sure if it would make it more interesting, only technologically more challenging. There are systems which could detect when it's stabilized for a certain period, but
by the way, I think maybe this is not the right moment, but if not, then I forget later. But that I recommend very much you to I don't remember when was our concert in Bunkier Sztuki, but perhaps that's also the nice reference to many of your works. But I remember the program, the concert with laptops.
yeah.
With dying laptops. You'll come back to
I come back to that later,
Okay.
if I'm not getting completely lost. That's another way of keeping or terminating a process. What is also in that piece is feedback, of course, as you noticed. And feedback is kind of on the root of many of these processes which influence itself and keep the sound or shape the sound. Now I'm going back much further, much more way back to when I first was here. You remember?
No.
In '96, when I came with that paper tube, there was a piece,
Yeah, with what was the second artist you came with?
Harald Münz.
Yeah, Harald Münz. Yes.
If you see the,
That was, I think, Goethe-Institut.
yeah, it was in
Location
Goethe-Institut.
Goethe-Institut.
Yeah, and
Each time we were using different. But in fact, the third piece with this game was also Goethe-Institut.
yeah. Now there was a piece which relied on a feedback setting which looked like that. An amplifier, a cardboard tube. I had it in the Goethe-Institut. And the microphone on top, and then a tape delay. That's not a good photo. just 2 tape machines. I just saw the photo. Here, that's it. One is recording, the other one is playing back, so you have a delay in between. And the title of that piece was, it's a mathematical formula. X of infinity is an operation of x of infinity. Forget about this square at the moment, which is taken from a text by Heinz von Förster, cyberneticist. He invented second-order cybernetics. Cybernetics is the process where something governs itself, and then second order is where something governs that which governs something. So it's 1 degree up of that. Why I choose that, it was, he references the pair organism and behavior, which later became important for people like Francisco Varela and Umberto Maturana with autopoietic systems. It's a description of an organism interacting with its environment, and the separation is not, from a systemic point, is not exactly as precise as from a biological point you have your skin. If you want to do yourself a favor and you haven't read it already, there's a great book by Maturana Varela called The Tree of Life, which is very cheap on Amazon now. In Germany, it's like, the copy is like €3 or so. And they talk about these autopoietic systems, how a living system interacts with the organism, is part of the organism, and how these boundaries are navigated between the organism and its environment.
Can you write this?
I can, yeah. Where would I put it? Maybe we make a new document.
It's not a big effort.
Well,
Maybe later. Maybe
no, it's the program. I use a different program maybe. And I make it bigger so that one can actually see something. Varela. The tree, not the T of life. No, it's not the tree of life.
But
It's a
it
tree
goes
of.
stream now, so you can check it later.
Yes, and I immediately made a mistake. It's the tree of knowledge. In German, it's the Baum der Erkenntnis. Well, it's Saturday morning.
You should spell it like this.
If there was a way of writing it like that. I'll play you an excerpt of it because it's 24 minutes and then I have no chance to talk. Now that it's here in tape. And I play a version of it which I did later in this giant tunnel space. There's a space in Cologne inside a bridge which runs under the pavement, and you can cross the Rhine, but it's actually, it's not usually publicly accessible, but since 95 we've been doing sound art installations there. And in 97 I got a chance to do a piece of my own, which I called, as you see in the title here, with this square, because I not only used the tape and back then I had more hair. Not only used the same amplifier, paper tube, and microphone setup and the 2 tape machines, but I also used the microphone at the end of one space and the loudspeaker at the end of the other space. So it was a cross feedback between those two and the smaller system. sounds coming.
But did you comparing with the previous one?
It was a bit low.
Do you have some extra?
No, I have no reserve anymore. If you give me a little more, but generally I'm not doing too much. a system which runs autonomously, but the space is acoustically, of course, not clean. You have the traffic going above and you have the tram going above. So there's constant changes in acoustics and what comes through, and at some point you also hear the audience, someone discovering the microphone and making use of it. slowly fading out, otherwise we fall all asleep. Oops. Oh, that was a bit more brutal than I intended to, sorry. Ah, no, it jumped back to the beginning. This we don't need. This whole iTunes thing is a bit mysterious to me. For example, it shows something is playing, but no, it stops. So I'm working a lot with feedback processes.
If you don't hear very well on the corridor, sometimes it's even better. We could speakers. You know? The microphone is here. That's how it's streamed. I will check in a moment.
Yeah, I can hear both voices.
You're in a good position.
The last piece I wanted to show in that aspect is a piece called Feedback Dance. It's again a setup a bit similar to the guitar piece. Loudspeakers, microphone, no guitar this time. But what happens between the loudspeaker and microphone, except for the feedback, is that using my hands I can cast a shadow in that feedback and change that feedback by moving my hands around the microphone. And there's again an envelope follower which follows the level of the feedback and commands a filter.
Could I ask one thing about the previous piece?
Yes, even
So,
two.
If there, in case there, let's call it background contamination, sound contamination was absent, you know, when the previous piece was recorded at that time, would you expect the frequency and the amplitude of the sound wave to be pretty much constant?
No.
No.
And the reason is because it's you saw the tape machines and the mixer. There was no digital technology involved, and meaning it's dirty. The system is never quiet, and that was actually an aspect which was important for the piece because in that Heinz von Förster quote, he talks about excitation and environment and behavior. So that the organism and behavior is not only related to the excitation from the outside, but also depending on the inner states. That's a very basic feature, but it has important consequences also for what is now done in brain research, for example. Like one of the more advanced theories about how our brain construction image of the world. And it's not only that it's not a one-way thing, perception goes in and gets processed and then we see a world, which is a mystery by itself, but also that we're constantly doing something like active prediction or active inference, as it's called. And that's another term of using AI, which I like much better. If you look for active, well, typing and talking is not my fault. And then the name to look for is Carl Friston, a British neuroscientist. He builds these models about how our perceptual apparatus anticipates the world and then adjusting what sensory data is coming in to that model already pre-created. And it gets pretty confusing, but also pretty understandable why we see things the way we see them and how our perceptual apparatus might function. It's still not proven in a sense like it's proven in normal mathematics that 1 and 1 is 2, but it's the best working hypothesis at the moment from what I gather from that field. And we not only have, as you might remember from biology lessons, we not only have like a perceptual apparatus for outside stimuli, but also the proprioceptive apparatus for how our muscles and how our body is positioned. So all that factors into how we perceive. And then we have these, for me it's always a miracle to think We have a time clock running the visual system. We have a time clock running the auditory system. And one still hasn't figured out if we have a central time clock like a computer has. So, and how do these two perceptions, only talking about visual and auditory stimuli, integrated into a coherent worldview? That's still pretty mysterious and has very practical implications. For example, when you watch TV, early TV, now with digital it's more integrated, they had to figure out a way how much difference between the sound and the image our brain would allow to keep them still in sync. Like you see somebody firing a gun and you hear the shot. And for technical reasons, there needed to be a delay. But how big can that delay be? Anybody got a figure?
How large or how long?
How long, yeah?
100 milliseconds.
Yeah. Actually, 100 milliseconds, which is pretty large. If you think about musicians' timing, they can perceive differences. Very good trained musicians up to 5 milliseconds. And so the general norm for like orchestral musicians is between 10 and 20 milliseconds. So 100 milliseconds to still keep it in sync somehow perceptually is a huge thing. It's even a bit more, 150 to 200. It's gigantic. So our brain is kind of fuzzy about that, or allows for this kind of fuzziness. And one wonders why that was produced this way, because it was certainly not produced for TV. Evolution didn't probably predict TV sets. Maybe it did, I don't know. Yeah, back to more mundane things like music. at the end, what I did to generate those clicks, just a second, was I transposed the feedback pitch so much down that it was broken up into individual pulses. So it was still a feedback technically, but like divided by several octaves, many octaves.
Have you tried different microphone characteristics? Is it working for anyone, or
Um,
it requires some special?
it requires a very cheap microphone. I tried with different microphones, but the one I settled for is actually like a 30 euro microphone, almost like trash. But that really gives me the most rich kind of tones. And regarding your question about the characteristics, it's a cardioid microphone. I didn't try a sphere one. I never used a condenser because they are particularly difficult to deal with in feedback situations. So it's a dynamic microphone. I tried once with a condenser microphone and I discarded the idea immediately.
Is it one speaker which it interacts with, or
It's two.
two?
But that was, it can be played on one speaker. It makes it more efficient for two hands if you use two speakers, because it's this sound field you're dealing with.
How are they located, those two speakers?
Like that, those two, and me being here. And bigger spaces help.
Yes, so we're talking about resonance in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the resonance of the space.
The resonance of the space, and then this mysterious thing with when you have a feedback in space, because it brings the whole space like into a nutshell together through the resonances and its acoustic characteristics.
Then we generate a wave, and then we filter different frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
We are just choosing, filtering different frequencies from this wave, which stays between
Yeah.
the microphone and the speaker.
And it's a pressure. A wave is kind of a pressure thing, so using my hands changes that pressure. It's like if you move your hands up and down your ears, you change your sonic perception. And it's basically what you do with the microphone here. I'm covering its ear. You had a question?
Yeah, so do I gather it right that by and large in your work you enjoy experimenting with sound equipment or other, let's call it equipment or machine objects?
You found me out, yes.
Okay. So I wanted to ask, because we talked just a little bit, you mentioned AI earlier, and I mean, I'm not most up to date on this topic, but I know that AI writes already lyrics and scores and produces music. But what in terms of using, everyday objects or existing musical equipment in ways, let's call it in innovative ways that haven't been used yet? Does the AI do this kind of stuff already? Has it been applied that way?
First, the way I talked about AI here is not the general way, because then it's artificial intelligence and this is active inference, and I'm throwing this as kind of like a fog bomb to derail you from thinking. And then AI in generating music is interesting, but I think also very foggy subject. Because nobody knows what's going on inside neural nets, which are now like mostly the equivalent of what AI does. So you train a neural net to do a certain task, and then it kind of approximates some result to make it like give a very broad impression of what it does. But what's going on inside the neural net, nobody knows. To the point that one of the most fascinating things is finding what is called adversarial examples, meaning you train an AI to, for example, for autonomous driving. That's where it matters. You train the AI to recognize street signs. Then some clever people figured out that if you put like a pink tape in the topmost right corner of that street sign, it will turn a one-way street sign into pedestrian crossing street sign. For some reason, nobody really understands. And that's the important thing. Google maintains an extra research branch to figure out what's going on inside these many layers of neural nets. Technically and mathematically, it's kind of describable, but how they interact is beyond what one can figure out. So one of the research branches is to create kind of a tagging system, what happens in each layer in order to peep into that black box. It's an amazing thing that one is able to construct this black box, and to a certain extent it can do its task, but you cannot be certain that it does what it's supposed to do, even if it looks pretty similar. One famous example was the AI trained to recognize tanks, Panzer, and it did it very successfully until somebody figured out, no, it was never recognizing a single tank. It was recognizing an environment, because mostly you see tanks in a green environment. And once they put the tanks in a concrete environment, an urban environment, it wouldn't recognize tanks anymore. Or other things like AI voice recognition, which goes more close to sound. Some people figured out that you can train it to recognize your voice and act accordingly. Like when you call your bank, some banks have these voice recognition systems and so on. But if you play a little specially prepared noise together with your voice, it will think you're singing it a song. And these are distortions in the perception of this neural network. Of course, like 2 or 3 years ago, everybody was fascinated by Google Deep Dream, these images where it detected sheep in the sky or so. You've probably all seen them. And that's, as the saying goes, for a blacksmith, everything looks like a hammer. So if you train an AI to recognize a hammer, it will find hammers all over the place. But maybe not where you're looking for the hammer. And now back to music. I don't know if you listen to examples of music created with AI.
I haven't much.
I have listened to quite some, and most of them sounded pretty shit to my ears. And that's also because they are as good as the training material. So this so-called assisted creativity, of course, they can fulfill a prescribed task. Like they can compose pretty good, like Vivaldi did, for example. I took part in a listening test where some university trained an AI to generate a Bach choral. You know, that's the Tonsatz exercise everybody has to do who studies composition. I don't know, or not everybody has to do. I hadn't to do it, but in some academies you have to do it. 4-part choral harmonization according to the rules of Bach. So the rules are pretty stable. Bach did everything you shouldn't do in his chorals, but there's a set of rules which you can abstract to a point. And then, so the listening test was, you had like 10 or 12 chorals, and you should decide, was it done by a human or was it done by Bach, by an AI? And they fooled me with 2. And I know that thing pretty well, so if they are able to fool me, that I consider that highly advanced. But is this interesting in terms of art? That's another question.
I think it's interesting in terms of also what people will have a demand for, because I always find it fascinating. To me, it's the scariest TV series ever, Black Mirror, and some of the episodes, it actually already exists in reality, the ones that have been emitted in the past.
They became real.
And you have one that was about holographic concerts. And actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, I think in 2019, there was supposed to be the first, I think, the first series of holographic concerts all around the world. One of the deceased female artists, I can't recall right now, was supposed to happen, got cancelled just, well, delayed really because of
The hologram died. Yes, of course you can deep fakes. That's the thing, the subject. You can substitute anything for anything if you have a powerful enough computer. But in terms of sound, it's surprisingly lame still. For example, Google has this, which pretty much, and they open source most of their code, so you can work with it, and that's a very nice thing. And they released this thing called, I think, Ensend or something, where you feed it samples and it will create morphs in between. So you can feed it a trumpet sample, and you can feed it a violin sample, and it will create iterations between the two. So it's a little box which you can buy and assemble yourself, and then you can slide your finger from between a trumpet and a violin. It sounds shit. My colleague at school, he built one. And why does it sound shit? Because to train that model, they use MP3, which is a reduction format. So they're not only morphing between a real sound, but also between all the artifacts MP3 carries with it. And of course, it's with all our bad instincts and impulses, they only get multiplied when you bring two together. And that makes a really rubbish sound. Not convincing. It's still fun to play with it. I don't know if you know the website Teachable Machines by Google. Let's bring it up. I think the talk becomes much more interesting now. Teachable Machines, now we want to see it in English. Actually, it comes in many languages. And I can't find the language switch now.
You know Emily Howell?
Sorry?
Emily Howell, AI, composing music.
Emily Howell.
Emily Howell.
No.
It's from 5 years ago, and it even creates orchestral pieces, which sounds pretty much like Messiaen.
Yeah, there is Holly Herndon, the pop artist, for example, who has an AI, which she calls an AI baby, which she uses to interact with in her songs. There's artists using that. So far, I have to say, I was not convinced that it couldn't be done easier with other means. But of course, it's a field interesting to explore. I would never diss any technological innovation, and we are in the baby steps. So if you are interested in that stuff, jump on it and research it. Sorry that I can't find the English setting, but if you here, there's even a Polish version of it.
Don't do it.
No, I can't do it. Otherwise, I'm lost. But let's settle for the English version. So if you go to audio, you can train an AI model, very simple one, with very simple means. The first thing it needs to know what's your background noise, because it needs to have a kind of layer from which to subtract. You all know this from image processing probably, or you don't know, but now you know. So what we will do, we will generate 20 background samples. You just are silent, and I try to keep my mouth shut too. Now we have to extract it. What you see is 20 images now, because it does not actually work on sound. And even more advanced, like this is a bit of a playground, but more advanced AIs, they are trained on spectrograms. And it's basically image processing. I'm working with an AI specialist at the moment to detect vocal sounds in a recording of some voice track. We're trying to do a recreation of In Sarah Menken by Bob Ashley and Paul de Marinis with the help of an AI guy in Berlin. That's the concert with the American people I talked about earlier. And tonight I got a devastating email that it failed. We provided many training samples for the vocal sounds, but they are too short. So, and that's a really highbrow machine. So now we have our background chopped up into 20 samples, and it's all spectrograms. Now we need something which it could detect. So, anybody volunteering to say A 8 times?
Maybe we should do it all together.
Okay, then for the detection task, we have.
To be shorter, no, this is only for streaming.
This is only for streaming. So when we put it live, I'll.
It would be nice if we will stay in a line, like now you.
That's the detection class we are training it for.
This first.
It goes in 2-second chunks. If I click that button, somebody should say A, or maybe I'm really bad at conducting and clicking buttons at the same time, or maybe I just do it.
But yeah, just start, and I think I know who will be the first.
A. So that was the first one.
I was late.
Next one. I'll be making the task not easy for our AI, because the simpler the better. Extract sample, otherwise we have to do it again. Wonderful. Do we want to give him an extra set? Maybe one more. Yeah, that was the difference thing. Okay, now we train our model, meaning it learns to recognize the spectrogram of this and differentiate it from what is in the background. So now we could export our model and use it in P5.js or in some other JavaScript language, but we just don't do that now. We see that what it detects background noise if we are silent. Now let's do the A. It comes up to 100% certainty. It comes pretty close while I'm talking anyway. So one wonders what features it detected. We could make it more advanced by adding another class and training it for eyes or U's or so. But you can do that at home. Just to give you an idea of how that thing operates on a basic level. And of course, you can get interesting results. You can do the same thing with visuals, make it recognize gestures, which it can do much better. And use that in whatever thing. And now I've kind of lost track to go on. I'll close that page, otherwise it will probably do something which I don't want.
1%.
Yeah, it will shriek as soon as I try to close it. The one thing lacking here is that you cannot upload your own pre-processed samples. It has an upload button, but this is only if you have exported your samples, then you can re-upload them. Yeah, when I discovered it, I was hoping for the same, but the format it stores them on is kind of weird.
Maybe is it possible to fake
A fake audio stream.
fake the, no?
Yeah, that's possible, of course. So, but you cannot simply prepare a set of audio files and then bang it up. Yes, I want to leave that page. Marek mentioned before the work I did with computers. Oops, is that me? But what's playing? Ah, okay. No, that's this playing, which it shouldn't now. Stop it. And this has nothing to do with what I wanted to talk about. Just couldn't keep its mouth shut. Since I'm working with computers and I'm working with electronic media, but for me the important thing is always to keep a connection that it's an embodied thing. Even the computer is kind of solid material. You mostly don't look inside, sometimes you do. But I'm interested, and that there was a series of works interested in the physical properties of computers. Meaning, for example, it's a 2-minute 50 video where I show different aspects of what that can mean. That's something where I play my laptop as an accordion. It's a feedback between built-in microphone and loudspeaker, and I filter it with the keyboard. With those, it's not longer easily possible because they changed position of the objects. So that's an older machine. That was an even older model where the microphone is in the lid here up. So I used the bow to drive a constructed viola model. My composition teacher was Johannes Fritsch, whom not many might know. He was part of the group of musicians working with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen in the 60s. And he played the viola with electronics attached. So he was one of the first people to make pieces for viola and live electronics. Violectra was his most famous piece in that aspect. And when he turned 60, we made a birthday concert, and I created this piece for us, and it was electro viola I reversed the whole process. And that was the beginning of it all, actually, in the 90s, when I wanted to find out what sounds do computers make when you open them up. So this is a office computer. It is booted, and I connected some wires to the circuitry to find out what sounds would come out. And at that stage, I made a shortcut by salted water. You have to know what you're doing. I wouldn't recommend trying it.
Wet computer, this is
Wet electricity. And like here, in that spot, there's 220 volt. So you better know what you're doing. Yeah, but it still goes in there.
But that's why the water is salted, right?
Oops, that's a different story.
we can call it as a part of circuit bending, yes? Or
It's kind of circuit bending. It's the difference to circuit bending is that it's destructive. because at the end the computer is really dead. There's no way to recover it.
And you cannot bend.
In general, is a risk of frequent bending in general.
When I created that piece,
The human too.
I was still piano teacher, and the father of one of my students, he had a recycling company for office electronics, so I had unlimited access to computers, and I quite used it. But these days, it's actually, they invited me to do it at a festival in Belgium a couple of years ago, and they had a hard time finding a suitable computer because they are so miniaturized now that I cannot easily attach a wire to the circuitry. And then they asked me, how long does the piece last? And I said something between 5 and 50 minutes. And this thing was modern, and it lasted only 5 minutes. It was a bit disappointing for them, but it was still fun. But what's at the heart of it all is, of course, you have a computer, it does something, and if you work with computers and electronic sounds, you know something, you're asking it too much. Then crackles appear in the sound. And I don't know if you ever thought about that is also while it sounds. You probably hate it when it crackles in your audio program. But when I was struggling with that, I created a piece which systematically overloads the computer to just generate crackling sounds. That's
Many people remember this performance very much.
the benchmark consort. It's because you want to know how fast is your computer. So I run a program which opens a window. In this window is a little synthesizer which makes a beep, and then I open the next one and the next one and the next one, and I get every
I
computer.
used 2 of my laptops.
One went up in flames, but it was.
That was delivered, and just
That's a shitty video from a performance in Oldenburg. That's what's happening on the screen. That's what.
The first one has died. Well, the laptop.
to jest już,
Ja, ja.
one już nie są w stanie wykonać tych algorytmów, bo dla mnie polega na przeładowaniu urządzenia i w końcu zwycięzca jest ten, co ostatni jeszcze dyszy. Jeszcze co jakiś czas wypluwa coś tam, a reszta już jest umarła zupełnie. Już się zatkały całkowicie.
Using the same program in your performance nowadays?
I haven't performed in a long time, so I would have to make a.
But this is the second chapter. Yes?
That's the second chapter with the bandoneon book to give it a kind of. And the latest iteration is actually for smartphone, so I can test my iPhone how long it will run. Yeah, well, we're always coming back to the roots.
Maybe we can make some. Put it in.
One interesting aspect in this piece is that you find out operating systems for these machines are optimized for graphic, for visual rendering, not so much for sound. It already crashed.
No, but I love it also the form of performance that people are sitting as a chamber laptop orchestra in front of the audience, quite stable, you know, with those laptops which are like the body shape, and then the people don't do nothing, just sitting. Computers, you know, working and dying. In fact, you know. That's like a special moment. But then you have one key, yes, and then we go to the second chapter.
Yes, I made an escape key when no sound is coming anymore, to crash the program and move on to the next chapter. That's what we did in Krakow. There was a special version where everybody played on the accordion.
Yes.
Mm.
Then you are moving, you are walking. So we are waving people on the place by those two wings of laptops. But they were also based on the feedback, yes?
Yeah, that's feedback only. Mhm. There's one last thing I wanted to show you, and then we're probably done for today. I don't know how long actually I was supposed to.
Regular time is 1.5 hours.
Okay.
So we are still on time.
It's we're still about sound and energy thing, and these were mostly examples about generating sound, but it also, for me, it applies to filtering sounds, since we are constantly surrounded by sound, and I'm trying to find ways to meaningfully kind of filter sounds. Now one could talk long about what does meaningful mean. Meaningful for me has to do with structure. You probably noticed that I'm very much interested in generating structures which somehow terminate at one point or another. And so filtering, the most natural approach for me was to use the existing pitch grid, like the 12 pitches we have in Western music. It could be any, but that's the one I'm kind of rooted in, being a Western European. And then bringing it into conflict with what acoustic sound from the environment is, which is non-striated territory, as Deleuze would say, meaning it's a territory without marks. If you go out, you have a sound spectrum which is full from the very low to the very high, and it's not rasterized in any sort. It's our treating of it which creates these rasters, and so I used a very, very artificial kind of rasterization to mark it as a territory. It's to sort it, and then that's something which I would pass you on headphones.
So do you mean, in terms of your interest, essentially in real environment to extract different sounds and be able to distinguish between their sources and say like the...
Not the least.
Okay.
I use them as they are, and I do what we also do with our ears, just on a larger and more rigid scale. I extract frequency bands. Now the clock is ticking behind. Now we are back on track. That's the thing. If you want to do things like that, learn pure data instead of Maximus P, and then use a thing called MobuPlat, mobile music platform, which lets you create GUIs and put your pure data patches on iPhone or Android phones and use them as programs. The next logical step in that aspect would be using JavaScript and create websites. Then it's even more independent, but this, when it came out, I found it this thing is made in pure data and with MobuPlat, which provides to create a GUI for it. Very useful. So what does it do? You see the circle of fifths. which is similar to the clock. You have the 12 pitches sorted, and it takes microphone input. And if you open, if I unplug here and I open that slider, it will feedback, of course, because the microphone input will be processed by that filter. And you will hear changing sound. You hear those pitches where the clock hands stand. So it can run 24 hours, 7 days a week, for years, if you provide enough electricity. And you will get a constantly changing soundscape, which is now it's kind of beautiful feedback. But the more interesting thing is if you listen to it through headphones and don't have the feedback, and somebody makes a sound. So who wants to try? Oops. You can adjust the volume because it might be too loud with the volume slider. Yeah. And we have to talk in order for him to have a signal. You hear me talking?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
I hear.
You hear the rhythms because you only hear very few pitches selected out of that.
So you can talk yourself, or
You can talk yourself, you can stomp your feet or do whatever.
you can beat somebody.
If you would be on a street, it would be like busy street noise. And this thing exists in two iterations. It exists as the app for mobile devices, which I'm passing around now, and it exists as a physical installation with 12 loudspeakers and a projected clock in the middle. So you can, and usually I put a microphone on the outside, some busy road. Those photos are from the Kunsthalle in Budapest. And then the loudspeakers are aligned to the clock face. So they are in the angles where the numbers are. That's of course a stereo reduction if you're in the sound field. Make a bit louder sound. Hey, louder! Or you can use that sound. At one point there's an ambulance coming through the recording, which is beautiful.
Talking to yourself is very nice.
Because what comes out is it's very steep filters. Technically, they're programmed with a giant FFT. For each pitch, I use 5 octaves. So very narrow bass band filters with an FFT. So very sharp boundaries on the edges, and then it comes almost out like a sine tone. That gives it this organ-like quality. No, I don't sell it. I give it to who is interested. And Android. Yeah, you need Modplat installed, that framework. It's an app which you can download for free. And then there's a folder. I haven't set it up, but I can. If you send me a reminder, I can give you. Clock. Watch out! ambulance going through the filter. It's clock of fifths here. Sorry? Yeah, of course. Yeah. This is not created through a feedback. The microphone is really outside on the street of the museum.
Make a feedback loop with those speakers and this microphone.
We can try. We could hook this one, the iPad, up to the cable actually, instead of the headphones. Then it comes through the speakers. Okay. You mean you want to run a feedback through the stream?
Checking what is available.
No mam tutaj mikrofon. Tu jest. Wziąłem dziada tutaj na korytarz. No.
Jak się dzieje?
Aha. So you should hear.
Wow. Okay. I will take it back.
Good man.
Take it back. Should I?
Oh, good. I just announced, Marek, that it's 1:30 and I stop talking now, unless there are questions.
Yeah, there were some questions during the show, so
Do you have some questions?
Maybe as a last remark, I'm not so much actually interested in sounds. I'm more interested in the process which generates sounds. So I will never make beautiful music, but maybe interesting one.
What does it mean?
Exactly. Yes.
So are you in a way looking a lot into like the physics of music, kind of, you know, like the wave properties of music?
I'm interested in physical properties and physical behavior. Yeah. That's what sound is about, if it becomes audible.
Can you like recommend any good sources on that? Like you recommended some literature before?
Oh, I studied physics at one point, and that's so long ago that I don't remember the books we used. I mean, there's a good introduction to physical acoustics used to be this book by Juan Röderer. I'm not sure if it's available in Polish. Yeah, acoustics. Let's Google it, because I might be wrong on many accounts. That's the book. Sorry for pulling up Amazon. I don't earn anything. But I'm sure it's been translated in many languages. it's not the newest book. So there's many books about these things which have come out in the last years. But when I read it, I found it quite good. Does he have an R at the end? Yes. Oh, okay. At least I got the name right. There's a lot of material actually online now these days, and it's surprisingly good about physics of sound. And if you're interested in composition or so, I would say that's the most important thing, is to get an understanding of the physics of sound. That will sometimes broaden your perception of what you want to do structurally, even if you're interested in creating like emotional content or so. For example, I did a project with friends long ago. We built an organ for low frequencies, a sub-bass organ for frequencies 20 hertz and below, which are perceptually active, meaning that if you move for a while in an environment like that, your perception will alter. It's not like taking drugs, but it has a strange effect on your psyche. I can testify to that by just when we built it and we rehearsed in that environment. It always felt quite strange later. And it's hard to describe. It's not like smoking a joint or so, or other stuff. It's really like kind of a small shift in the perception of the world. And it makes clear how much we are in constant exchange with the acoustic environment, because that's an extreme acoustic environment. For an elephant, it would be just plain music, because they use very low frequencies. They communicate with their feet, sensing vibrations in the ground. And that's something which, with an orchestra, you just cannot get there.
How powerful speakers does it require?
No speakers. Large tubes. Let me see if I can find. Don't look now. It does have a search function. It was in Zwettl, in some monastery in Austria. If somebody reads on the sideline, can detect something like Zwettl, please give a holler. I might easily overlook it now. Then it would be Zwettl. There we are. So to give you an impression of the size of those pipes we built, here we go. And we built the bellows also. There was a beautiful Baroque organ. Those are the pipes. And then you can do something which you can create a standing wave here, but a longer room would be better, so that you can move between the peaks and valleys of a sound. There's a point where it shatters your ear and a point where you only hear very little within the same space, and you just move a small distance. And here the distance, of course, was much larger because the pipes were so long. Any more pipes? Yeah, this cupboard-like thing, that's also a pipe for very low frequencies. It's where the air goes up and down. You can in German you say gekröpft. I wouldn't know an English word for it. Pipe doesn't need to be one stretch. It can be like a U.
Hold it.
The only thing is you need this
Green
kind of
instrument.
yeah, exactly. And the air column still vibrates. So no loudspeaker.
So you know the lecture was not the introduction to the program at evening. That's
Not at all.
Different form.
I didn't want to spoil anything.
So I can say that it partly I like it, which I even talked yesterday that I like a pure contact with a piece of art we never had before. So that would be the case this evening, that we have the project by Britta Ferman and Hans Koch at Hebre around 9 o'clock. That's I even separate them in time. Shadow Puppet at 8 o'clock, since we have to take down the first project altogether. It would be like 1 hour with a break, and then we start Scheinleisung VA at exactly at 9 o'clock.
Or almost exactly. You never know. We don't make promises.
Don't make it a reference yesterday, but we started kind of precise.
Yes.
That's what I mean.
Okay, maybe see you tonight, or you see us on stream. Thanks for coming.
No, bardzo Państwu dziękujemy. Jesteśmy na okrągło jutro. So tomorrow, if you are especially interested in a series of lecture meetings, presentations, tomorrow at the same time. We are meeting at 12, and then we have two lecture presentations tomorrow. So Alfredo Costa Monteiro from Barcelona.